Empty your bag. Now. The command cracked through the supermarket like a dropped steel bar, sharp enough to silence an entire checkout lane. Heads turned instantly. Shopping carts slowed. Somewhere near the frozen foods aisle, a toddler stopped crying mid-whimper as Officer Ryan Keller stepped forward with one hand raised and the other hovering near the black utility belt strapped tight around his waist. Under the harsh white grocery lights, Captain Alina Hayes stood perfectly still beside Register 7, rainwater still clinging to the shoulders of her dark wool coat. A silver gift box rested near her chest, half tucked beneath her arm, the tiny gold ribbon slightly crushed from the storm outside. "Sir," she said calmly, her voice low and controlled, "there's been a misunderstanding." But Ryan Keller was already moving. Fast. Confident. Too confident. He snatched the shopping bag from her hand hard enough for it to swing sideways and hit the metal edge of the register. A few items spilled across the polished tile floor. An orange rolled beneath a candy display. A bottle of aspirin spun in a slow circle before tipping over near a child's sneaker. Then the small jewelry box slid free and landed directly between them. The electronic theft sensor attached beneath it began flashing red. A loud alarm chirped through the front entrance gates. The sound changed everything. The crowd reacted instantly, whispers spreading like sparks through dry grass. "She stole it. I knew something looked off." Someone called backup. Alina didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. Her dark eyes lowered briefly toward the box before lifting again to Ryan's face. Calm, tired, measured. The kind of calm that didn't belong in a moment like this. Ryan mistook it for guilt. "Step away from the merchandise," he barked, reaching for her wrist. Now, outside the automatic glass doors, rain hammered against the parking lot in silver sheets, headlights glowing through the storm like blurred stars. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while dozens of strangers watched a black woman become the center of a public accusation in less than 10 seconds. Near the candy racks stood a little boy no older than 9, his small hand wrapped tightly around his mother's sleeve. Micah Jackson stared wide-eyed at Alina as another officer entered through the front doors, radio crackling loudly on his shoulder. "Female suspect detained near checkout," Ryan said into his mic without looking away from her. "Possible shoplifting." The word possible disappeared under the weight of his tone. To everyone listening, she was already guilty. Alina slowly inhaled through her nose, the scent of wet pavement and burnt coffee lingering in the cold air drifting through the entrance every time the doors opened. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her coat sleeve. "Officer," she said carefully, "you need to check the cameras before this goes any further." Ryan laughed once under his breath. Short, dismissive. Funny how everyone says that. He grabbed the jewelry box from the floor and held it up for the growing crowd to see. "Unpaid merchandise concealed in bag," he announced loudly. "That enough evidence for you?" Several customers nodded immediately. Someone lifted a phone higher to record. Alina noticed all of it. The cameras, the judgment, the quiet satisfaction on certain faces. She had seen scenes like this before from the opposite side of the badge. Too many times. A store manager hurried over from customer service, heels clicking sharply against tile. Linda Graves, mid-50s, blonde bob, nervous smile sharpened by suspicion. She glanced once at Alina, then immediately toward Ryan. "Officer, I knew something wasn't right the second she walked in." Linda whispered loudly enough for half the front registers to hear. She kept looking around. Micah frowned from across the aisle. Even he could hear the unfairness in the woman's voice. Alina turned slowly toward Linda. Not angry, just disappointed. "I was looking for a birthday gift," she said softly. Linda crossed her arms tighter. "That's what they all say." The sentence landed harder than the accusation itself. For the first time, something shifted behind Alina's eyes. Not fear, not panic. Exhaustion, deep exhaustion. The kind built from years of swallowing disrespect quietly just to survive another day. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her coat onto the supermarket floor while Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice enough so only she could hear him. "Don't make this difficult." Alina looked directly at his badge. "Keller." Then she looked back into his face. "You already did," she said quietly. And somewhere beyond the storm outside, thunder rolled low across the dark Texas sky. The automatic doors slid open again with a burst of cold rain air as 2 more officers entered the supermarket, their boots leaving dark water prints across the white tile floor. The flashing patrol lights outside painted the glass entrance in waves of red and blue that reflected across cereal boxes, shopping carts, and nervous faces frozen in place near the registers. Alina Hayes stood beside checkout 7 with her hands visible at her sides, while Officer Ryan Keller spoke rapidly into his shoulder radio, his voice clipped with the kind of excitement that came from believing he had caught someone important. Around them, whispers kept moving through the crowd like electricity. Some customers stared openly. Others pretended not to watch while quietly recording everything on their phones. Alina noticed every lens pointed toward her. She had spent nearly 20 years wearing a badge in Houston, and she knew exactly how quickly a single public moment could become permanent online. The store manager hovered nearby, clutching a tablet against her chest like a shield. Linda Graves kept glancing toward the jewelry box sitting on the counter, then back at Alina, as if expecting her to suddenly confess. "I saw the alarm go off myself," Linda insisted to one of the arriving officers. She had the item in her bag already. Alina closed her eyes briefly. Just one breath. In through the nose. Out slowly. Her father used to teach her that during storms, when she was a little girl growing up on the east side of Houston, never let chaos borrow your dignity. The memory passed through her mind as quickly as lightning. Ryan stepped closer again, broad shoulders stiff beneath his rain-darkened uniform. "I am going to ask you one last time," he said firmly. "Do you have proof of purchase for the jewelry?" "No," Alina answered honestly, "because I had not purchased it yet." Ryan smirked slightly, turning toward the crowd as though her answer proved everything. Convenient. Near the magazine racks, Micah still had not moved. His mother tried pulling him toward another checkout lane, but the little boy resisted quietly, eyes locked on Alina's face. He could not explain why, but something about her calmness felt wrong compared to the way guilty people acted in movies. She did not look angry. She did not look scared. She looked tired, deeply tired. Rainwater still dripped from the edge of her coat onto the floor in tiny, steady taps. One of the younger officers shifted awkwardly beside Ryan. "Maybe we should check surveillance first," he suggested carefully. Ryan shut the idea down instantly. The sensor alarm already confirmed probable cause. Alina turned her head slowly toward the younger officer. "What is your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Officer Ramirez." "Officer Ramirez," she said softly. "You know procedure matters more than assumptions." Ryan's jaw tightened immediately. "You do not get to lecture us about procedure." Alina held his stare without blinking. "I am not lecturing you." Her voice remained low and even. "I am warning you." For a split second, uncertainty flickered across Ryan Keller's face. Tiny, almost invisible. Then pride buried it just as quickly. He reached for her wrist again. "Turn around." Several shoppers gasped softly. Micah looked up at his mother with confusion spreading across his small face. "Mom," he whispered. "Why are they treating her like that?" His mother did not answer. She only pulled him closer against her coat, while thunder rolled outside the building again, low and distant across the soaked parking lot. Alina slowly placed the gift box back onto the counter herself before turning around. Her movements were careful and controlled, like someone trying not to escalate a situation already balancing on broken glass. Ryan removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The cold metal clicked loudly in the front of the store, sharp enough to silence even the whispers for a moment. Alina glanced once toward the front windows where rain streaked down beneath the flashing patrol lights. Then she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "My father warned me this day would come eventually." Ryan frowned. "What does that mean?" Alina did not answer. She only lifted her chin slightly as the cuffs closed around her wrists, and somewhere in the distance, hidden beneath the sound of rain and radio static, a hospital phone continued ringing unanswered beside an old man waiting for his daughter to come back. The rain hit harder by the time Officer Ryan Keller guided Alina Hayes through the supermarket entrance and toward the patrol cars waiting beneath the flickering parking lot lights. Water splashed beneath their shoes as automatic doors opened and closed behind them, carrying faint echoes of whispers from the crowd still watching through the glass. Phones remained pressed against windows, faces blurred beneath fluorescent reflections. Some people looked curious. Some looked satisfied. A few looked uncomfortable now that handcuffs were involved. Alina stepped carefully across the soaked pavement without resisting, her dark coat swaying slightly in the wind, while red and blue lights washed over her face in slow pulses. Ryan kept one hand near her arm, even though she had given him no reason to. Somewhere behind them, Officer Ramirez hesitated near the curb before finally jogging closer through the rain. "Keller," he called out, lowering his voice. "Dispatch is asking if we are transporting immediately." Ryan opened the back door of the cruiser. "Yeah, theft suspect is in custody." The word suspect sounded heavier now. More official, more dangerous. Alina paused before entering the vehicle. Rain collected along her eyelashes, but she did not wipe it away. She looked toward the dark Houston skyline, glowing faintly beyond the shopping center, and for a brief second her mind drifted back to Memorial West Hospital 12 miles away. Room 614. Her father lying weak beneath pale hospital sheets with an oxygen line beneath his nose. She had promised him she would only be gone 20 minutes. Just enough time to buy the watch he kept admiring weeks earlier in a magazine left beside his bed. A silver watch with a navy blue face and old-fashioned hands because he hated digital clocks. Her chest tightened quietly at the thought. "Ma'am," Ramirez said awkwardly, "watch your head getting in." Alina looked at him for a moment. Young, nervous, not cruel yet. "Thank you," she said softly before lowering herself into the back seat. Ryan shut the door firmly. Rain hammered against the cruiser roof like steady drumbeats while condensation slowly fogged the windows from the inside. Alina rested her cuffed hands carefully in her lap and leaned back against the cold vinyl seat. The scent inside the vehicle was familiar. Coffee, wet fabric, radio static. She had spent half her adult life in patrol cars just like this one. That realization settled over her heavier than the cuffs themselves. Outside, Ryan paced beneath the rain while speaking into his radio again. Female, approximately 42. No identification provided at scene. Alina closed her eyes briefly. That part was true. Her badge case and wallet were still sitting in her shoulder bag inside the supermarket near Register 7, where the officers had left everything scattered across the counter. Ryan never bothered checking. He had already decided who she was the moment he saw her standing there. Through the fogged glass, she noticed Micah still standing beneath the store awning with his mother. The little boy stared directly at the cruiser, his small face caught between fear and confusion. Alina remembered being his age once, watching officers place her uncle against a patrol car outside a gas station, while neighbors stood nearby, pretending not to stare. She remembered the feeling that settled into her chest afterward. Not anger, not even sadness. Just the terrible understanding that dignity could disappear in public faster than rainwater down a storm drain. The driver's side door opened suddenly. Ryan climbed inside, water dripping from his sleeves onto the center console. His jaw remained tight, proud, defensive. He adjusted the rearview mirror slightly and finally looked at her directly through the reflection. "You still have not told me your name." Alina met his eyes in the mirror. "Calm as ever. You never asked respectfully." Ryan scoffed softly and started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed pale green across his face while dispatch chatter crackled through the speakers. Then a voice suddenly broke through the static. "Attention, all units. Captain Hayes has not responded to wellness check requests from Memorial West Hospital. Last known vehicle registered near North Briar Shopping Center." Ryan's hand froze on the steering wheel. For one long second, the only sound inside the cruiser was rain. Ryan Keller stared at the radio mounted beside the dashboard, as if the voice coming through it had suddenly changed languages. Rain streaked sideways across the windshield while the green glow from the patrol car controls reflected faintly in his widened eyes. "Repeat that," he said sharply into the microphone, his voice no longer carrying the same confidence as before. Dispatch answered immediately through static. "Captain Alina Hayes, Houston Police Department. Last known location tied to North Briar Shopping Center through vehicle registration ping." The silence that followed inside the cruiser felt heavier than thunder. Officer Ramirez, still standing outside beneath the rain, leaned closer toward the passenger window. "Captain Hayes," he repeated quietly, confusion spreading across his face. Ryan slowly turned his head toward the back seat. Alina remained exactly where she had been moments earlier, hands resting calmly in her lap beneath the silver cuffs, dark eyes fixed on the storm sliding across the windows. She did not smirk. She did not celebrate. If anything, she looked even more exhausted now. Ryan swallowed hard. "You are Captain Hayes?" Alina finally looked at him directly. You never asked my name respectfully, she repeated softly. The words landed harder this time. Outside the cruiser, rainwater rushed along the parking lot gutters beneath the flashing patrol lights while shoppers still gathered beneath the store awning, sensing something had changed even if they did not yet understand what. Micah stared toward the vehicle with his mouth slightly open, watching the officers move differently now. Slower. Less certain. Ryan quickly grabbed the radio again. Dispatch, stand by. His fingers tightened around the microphone. Possible identification issue. Possible. The same word suddenly sounded fragile now. Ramirez opened the rear passenger door carefully, cold rain air flooding inside the vehicle. Captain, he said awkwardly, almost stumbling over the title. I am sorry, ma'am. I did not know. Alina looked up at him. Water dripped steadily from the young officer's cap onto the pavement below. That is part of the problem, she answered quietly. Ryan climbed out of the cruiser immediately, boots splashing through shallow puddles as he paced several feet away beneath the rain. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and opened department records. The screen illuminated his face pale blue in the storm darkness. One search was all it took. Captain Alina Hayes. 20 years active service. Commendations for hostage negotiation, community outreach, and crisis intervention. Internal Leadership Award recipient. Training supervisor. His stomach dropped lower with every line. Then he saw the department photo. Same eyes. Same calm expression. Same woman sitting handcuffed in the back of his patrol car, while half the shopping center recorded the moment on their phones. Ryan lowered the device slowly. Rain rolled down the back of his neck beneath his collar, but he barely noticed anymore. Across the lot, Linda Graves stood frozen near the entrance doors, her arms no longer crossed confidently. The shoppers around her had started whispering again, but the tone had changed completely now. A woman quietly lowered her phone. Another customer shook his head under his breath. One man muttered, "Man, they arrested their own captain?" Ryan walked back toward the cruiser slowly this time. No swagger left. No performance. Just the sound of wet boots against asphalt and distant thunder moving farther across the city skyline. He opened the rear door carefully. Alina lifted her cuffed hands slightly toward him, not demanding freedom, simply waiting to see what kind of man he would become next. Ryan reached for the cuffs, but his hands hesitated halfway. Captain, the apology would not come out clean. Shame clogged it before it reached his mouth. Alina studied him for a long moment beneath the flashing lights reflecting across both their faces. Then her eyes drifted past him toward the hospital bracelet barely visible beneath her coat sleeve. Memorial West. Room 614 still waiting. My father is dying, she said softly. And tonight I spent my last free hour in the back of a patrol car because you looked at me before you looked for truth. Ryan closed his eyes briefly as rain continued falling around them, steady and cold. Ryan Keller unlocked the handcuffs with trembling fingers while rainwater streamed down the side of the patrol car in silver ribbons beneath the parking lot lights. The metal clicked open softly, almost too softly for a moment that had already become so loud in everyone's memory. Alina Hayes slowly lowered her hands without saying a word. Red marks circled her wrists beneath the sleeves of her dark coat, but her face remained composed, calm in a way Ryan could no longer understand. Around them, the atmosphere outside the supermarket had completely changed. The whispers had stopped sounding entertained. Now they sounded ashamed. Several people quietly put their phones away. Others avoided looking directly at Alina, as though eye contact itself carried guilt. Officer Ramirez stepped back respectfully, rain dripping from his jawline, while dispatch chatter continued crackling faintly through nearby radios. Ryan cleared his throat once before speaking. Captain, I need to explain. Alina stepped out of the cruiser carefully, one hand briefly touching the roof for balance as cold rain soaked through the shoulder of her coat again. She looked smaller now somehow. Not weak, just tired in a deeply human way that no rank or badge could hide. No, she said softly. You needed to investigate. The sentence cut deeper than anger would have. Ryan opened his mouth again, but another voice interrupted from behind them. Captain Hayes. A black SUV had just pulled sharply into the lot beside the patrol cars, tires spraying water across the pavement. Sergeant David Monroe stepped out immediately, his expression tightening the second he saw Alina standing in the rain beside Ryan Keller. Jesus, he muttered under his breath as he approached. Monroe had worked under Alina for nearly 6 years in major crimes. He knew the look on her face tonight. It was the same expression she wore after difficult notifications, impossible cases, and funerals for fallen officers. Controlled pain. "Captain," Monroe said gently, "the hospital has been trying to reach you for almost an hour." Alina's eyes shifted instantly. The storm sounds around them suddenly seemed farther away. "My father." Monroe hesitated for half a second too long. That was enough. Alina's breathing changed immediately, small but noticeable. "He coded earlier tonight," Monroe said carefully. "Doctors stabilized him, but they do not know for how long." Ryan felt the blood drain from his face completely. Rain continued tapping against metal and asphalt while the words settled over everyone standing there. Alina closed her eyes briefly. Just 1 second. Then she nodded once like someone forcing herself to remain upright through an invisible weight pressing against her chest. "I need to go." Her voice almost disappeared beneath the storm. Monroe immediately moved toward the SUV and opened the passenger door for her. Ryan stepped forward instinctively. "Captain Hayes, please." "I am sorry." Alina paused before entering the vehicle. The flashing patrol lights reflected across her face while rainwater slid slowly down the side of her neck beneath strands of dark hair, now damp from the storm. She looked at Ryan fully for the first time since the cuffs came off. "Do you know what hurts most?" she asked quietly. Ryan could not answer. "It is not the accusation." Her eyes drifted briefly toward the supermarket windows where customers still watched silently from inside. It is how easy it was for everyone to believe it. The parking lot fell completely still around those words. Even the radios seemed quieter somehow. Micah stood beneath the awning holding his mother's hand tighter now, his young face locked on Alina like he was watching something important he would remember for the rest of his life. Ryan lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement, shame crawling slowly across every part of him. The storm no longer felt cold enough to match what sat in his chest. Alina finally stepped into the SUV. Before Monroe closed the door, she looked once more toward Ryan Keller standing alone beside his patrol car beneath the flashing lights. "A badge does not protect people," she said softly. "People protect people, or they fail them." Then the SUV door closed, sealing warmth and silence inside, while rain continued pouring over the parking lot outside. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in steady rhythm as Sergeant David Monroe drove through the rain-soaked Houston streets toward Memorial West Hospital. Water blurred the city lights outside into streaks of gold and red that slid across the glass like fading memories. Inside the SUV, the heater hummed softly against the cold while Captain Alina Hayes sat silently in the passenger seat, one hand resting near the silver gift box balanced carefully on her lap. The ribbon had come loose during everything that happened at the supermarket. One corner of the wrapping paper was bent inward slightly from where it hit the floor earlier, but she kept smoothing it gently with her thumb as if fixing the paper could somehow repair the night itself. Monroe glanced toward her twice before finally speaking. "You should let Internal Affairs handle Keller." Alina kept her eyes forward. "They will." Her voice sounded distant now, drained from exhaustion more than anger. Outside, ambulance lights flashed briefly at an intersection before disappearing into the storm behind them. "That rookie crossed lines," Monroe continued quietly. "Half the department is already hearing about it." Alina leaned her head lightly against the window glass. Cool condensation pressed against her temple. "That is not what keeps replaying in my head." Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel slightly. He already knew what she meant. It was never just one officer. It was the crowd, the assumptions, the speed, the way strangers looked relieved to believe the worst. They pulled into the hospital parking structure 11 minutes later. Rain echoed hollowly through the concrete levels above them, while fluorescent ceiling lights buzzed faintly overhead. Monroe hurried around the vehicle to open Alina's door, but she was already stepping out carefully into the cold garage air. Her shoes clicked softly against wet concrete as they moved toward the elevator together. Inside the elevator, neither spoke. The silver numbers climbed slowly toward the 6th floor, while water dripped quietly from the edge of Alina's coat onto the rubber floor mat beneath them. When the doors finally opened, the familiar scent of antiseptic and stale coffee greeted them immediately. Nurses moved through the hallways beneath dim evening lights, their voices low and tired after midnight rounds. Room 614 sat near the end of the corridor beside a rain-covered window overlooking downtown Houston. Alina slowed as she approached the door. Through the small glass panel, she could see the steady green pulse of the heart monitor beside her father's bed. One beep. Pause. Another beep. Slow. Fragile. Monroe touched her shoulder gently. I will wait outside. Alina nodded once before stepping into the room alone. The lights were dim except for the soft monitor glow reflecting against pale hospital walls. Her father looked smaller now beneath the white blankets than he had even that morning. Tubes curved across his chest, and oxygen hissed quietly beside him. Yet the moment she entered, his eyes opened slightly. Baby girl. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Alina's throat tightened instantly. She moved closer to the bed and took his hand carefully between both of hers. Warm. Weak. Familiar. I am here, Daddy. He studied her face slowly, noticing the damp coat, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the faint red marks still circling her wrists. Fathers notice things even when the world misses them. Something happened, he murmured. Alina lowered her eyes briefly toward their joined hands. For the first time all night, her composure cracked just enough for sadness to slip through. Yeah, she whispered. Something happened. The rain outside tapped softly against the hospital windows while the monitor continued its quiet rhythm beside them. Her father squeezed her fingers weakly. But you came back. Alina looked at him then, truly looked at him, and suddenly the humiliation from the parking lot felt smaller than this moment. Smaller than the sound of his breathing. Smaller than the years this man spent teaching her how to survive without becoming bitter. She carefully placed the silver gift box beside his bed. I got you something. He smiled faintly through tired eyes. You always did have good timing. Outside the room, Monroe stood silently in the hallway while farther down the corridor a television mounted above the waiting area quietly replayed cell phone footage from a rainy supermarket parking lot where flashing police lights reflected off wet pavement and a black woman stood handcuffed beneath the storm. By sunrise, the rain had stopped over Houston, but the city still looked washed in gray through the hospital windows. Pale morning light stretched slowly across the sixth-floor hallway while exhausted nurses traded shifts beside coffee carts and quiet conversations. Inside room 614, Captain Alina Hayes sat beside her father's bed with her coat folded neatly across the chair behind her. The silver watch box rested unopened on the nightstand beneath the steady green glow of the heart monitor. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she still heard the sound of metal cuffs clicking shut in the supermarket parking lot. Across the city, however, millions of people had heard something else. By 6:30 in the morning, the cell phone footage had spread everywhere. Local news stations replayed the scene beside bold headlines while commentators debated racial profiling, police conduct, and public assumptions. The video showed only fragments: rain, flashing lights, a black woman standing silently beside a patrol car, while strangers recorded her humiliation from a distance. But what changed everything came 43 seconds later. That is Captain Hayes, a shocked voice could be heard saying off camera. Oh my God. Then the footage captured the exact moment Officer Ryan Keller's posture collapsed beneath the realization. The internet noticed immediately. Some people defended him. Most did not. At Precinct 8 downtown, the atmosphere felt heavier than storm clouds. Officers gathered around briefing room televisions in tense silence, while internal affairs investigators moved quietly between offices carrying folders and tablets. Ryan Keller sat alone at the far end of the locker room, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled uniform, staring at his reflection in the metal locker door across from him. He looked older somehow after one night. The confidence that once filled his shoulders had disappeared completely. Every few minutes another phone buzzed nearby, with new messages, new headlines, new reactions. Officer Ramirez entered carefully holding a paper coffee cup. You should eat something, he said quietly. Ryan did not respond at first. His eyes remained fixed downward toward his own hands. I saw her wrists after the cuffs came off, he muttered finally. She never even fought back. Ramirez leaned against the lockers beside him. That is because she knew fighting would not save her. The words settled heavily between them. Ryan rubbed both hands slowly across his face. I thought I was reading the situation correctly. Ramirez shook his head once. No, you thought you already knew who she was. Downtown traffic hummed faintly outside the precinct windows while somewhere deeper in the building a television replayed the supermarket footage again. Ryan could not escape it. The expressions on the crowd's faces. The phone's recording. The ease of it all. He had spent years telling himself he was protecting people. But now one question kept repeating louder than everything else. Protecting who? Back at Memorial West Hospital, Alina stood quietly near the hallway vending machines while Monroe spoke with one of the doctors down the corridor. Her father was stable for now. Stable. The word felt fragile in hospitals. She wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee she had barely touched when she noticed movement near the waiting room television. Micah, the little boy from the supermarket, sat beside his mother watching the morning news replay the footage again in silence. His mother looked embarrassed when she saw Alina approaching. "Captain Hayes," she said softly, standing immediately. "I am so sorry for what happened to you." Alina gave a tired smile. "You do not owe me an apology." Micah looked up at her carefully. "I knew you did not steal anything," he whispered. The honesty in his voice nearly broke her composure more than the humiliation itself had. Alina crouched slightly, so their eyes met evenly. "Why?" she asked gently. Micah shrugged once. "Because you looked sad. Not bad." For a moment, Alina could not speak. The hospital lights reflected softly across the polished floor around them, while distant monitor beeps echoed down the corridor. Then she smiled faintly and touched the boy's shoulder gently. "Do not lose that instinct," she said quietly. "A lot of adults already have." Behind her, Monroe approached holding his phone with a grave expression. "Captain," he said carefully, "the chief wants to see you this afternoon." Alina straightened slowly. She already knew why. What happened in that parking lot was no longer just a misunderstanding between officers. It had become a mirror, and the entire city was staring into it. The Houston police headquarters looked colder than usual beneath the overcast afternoon sky. Gray clouds still hung low over downtown, while television vans lined the curb outside the building. Satellite dishes pointed upward like metal sunflowers waiting for another storm. Reporters crowded near the entrance barriers holding microphones and phones, their voices overlapping beneath the sound of traffic and distant sirens. The moment Captain Alina Hayes stepped out of Sergeant Monroe's SUV, camera shutters erupted in rapid bursts. Questions flew toward her instantly. "Captain Hayes, do you believe racial profiling played a role? Will you press charges against Officer Keller? Do you think the department failed you?" Alina did not stop walking. Her dark coat moved softly in the wind, while officers stationed near the front entrance straightened instinctively as she passed. Some lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly with visible respect. None of them knew exactly what to say to a woman who had spent 20 years protecting a system that publicly humiliated her in less than 20 minutes. Inside headquarters, the air smelled faintly of coffee, printer toner, and rain-soaked uniforms drying near lockers. The usual noise of ringing phones and conversations felt muted today. Officers paused when she walked by. A few whispered apologies under their breath. Others simply looked ashamed. At the far end of the hallway outside Internal Affairs, Officer Ryan Keller stood alone beside a vending machine, still wearing the same wrinkled uniform from the night before. He looked like he had not slept at all. The second he saw Alina approaching, he straightened immediately. "Captain Hayes." His voice cracked slightly. Monroe slowed beside her, watching carefully, but Alina lifted one hand gently to signal she was fine. Ryan stepped forward awkwardly, eyes rimmed red from exhaustion and regret. "I asked to speak with you before the hearing." Alina studied him silently for a moment. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, while distant footsteps echoed somewhere deeper in the building. "Why?" she asked calmly. Ryan swallowed hard. "Because I owe you more than an apology." He looked down briefly at his own hands before continuing. "I watched the footage all night. Not just what I did. What everyone did. The crowd. The assumptions. The way nobody questioned it until they heard your title." His jaw tightened painfully. "And I realized something ugly." Alina remained still. Ryan forced himself to meet her eyes again. "If you were not Captain Hayes, none of this would have changed." The honesty in his voice carried no defensiveness anymore. Only shame. Alina glanced through the hallway window toward the cloudy skyline outside. "No," she answered softly. "It probably would not have." Ryan looked like the truth physically hurt him. "I thought being a good officer meant staying suspicious all the time," he admitted quietly. I stopped seeing people first. The hallway fell silent around them. Officers passing nearby slowed unconsciously, listening without pretending they were listening. Alina noticed all of it. The tension, the discomfort, the fear that one man's mistake had exposed something much larger than himself. She stepped a little closer to Ryan then, her voice calm but steady enough to settle into every corner of the hallway. Fear can help an officer survive, she said. But when fear becomes identity, it turns people into threats before they even speak. Ryan's eyes lowered again. I do not expect forgiveness. Alina nodded once. Good. The word stunned him slightly. Then her expression softened just enough to reveal exhaustion beneath the strength. Forgiveness is not the first step anyway. Ryan looked back up slowly. Then what is? Alina glanced toward the bullpen, where dozens of officers moved through another ordinary shift beneath fluorescent lights and computer screens. Accountability, she answered quietly. Then change. Somewhere down the hall, a television replayed the supermarket footage once more, but this time the sound was muted. No shouting, no sirens, just silent images flickering across the screen while officers stopped to watch themselves reflected inside the story. Ryan stood motionless as Alina finally turned toward the conference room waiting ahead where internal affairs investigators, department chiefs, and reporters were already preparing statements. Before she entered, she paused one final time beside him. You asked me earlier what hurt the most, she said softly. It was not being handcuffed. Ryan looked at her carefully. It was realizing how many people needed proof that I was human before they treated me like one. Then she walked away beneath the pale hallway lights while Ryan remained standing alone beside the vending machine, staring silently at the reflection of his own badge in the polished floor. 3 weeks later, the rain finally returned to Houston again. Soft this time. Quiet. The kind that tapped gently against windows instead of demanding attention. Captain Alina Hayes stood beneath the covered entrance of Memorial West Hospital wearing a long charcoal coat, while evening traffic reflected across the wet streets beyond the parking lot. In her hands rested a small bouquet of white lilies wrapped in brown paper. The city had changed in subtle ways since that night at the supermarket. The department announced mandatory bias retraining for every active officer in the precinct. Community meetings filled beyond capacity. Internal Affairs completed its investigation quietly but firmly. Officer Ryan Keller was suspended pending review and reassigned from patrol duty indefinitely. The news channels eventually moved on to newer stories, newer outrage, newer storms. But some moments do not leave people when the cameras disappear. They settle deeper instead. Inside the hospital chapel, warm candlelight flickered softly against stained glass, while distant thunder rolled low across the city skyline. Alina walked slowly toward the front pew where a framed photograph rested beside the altar. Her father smiling beneath an old fishing hat at Galveston Beach nearly 15 years earlier. She placed the lilies carefully beneath the frame and sat down alone in the silence. The funeral had ended hours ago. Family members had gone home. Officers who attended in dress blues had returned to duty. Sergeant Monroe left only 20 minutes earlier after making sure she would not spend the night entirely alone. But Alina needed the quiet now, needed space to hear her father's voice one last time beneath the noise of everything else. The chapel smelled faintly of candle wax and rain-soaked wool coats drying near the back entrance. She folded her hands slowly in her lap while grief moved through her not like a wave, but like tide water, steady, deep, impossible to stop completely. He was proud of you. The voice came softly from behind her. Alina turned slightly. Ryan Keller stood near the chapel doors wearing plain clothes instead of a uniform for the first time she had ever seen. No badge, no radio, no authority hanging from his shoulders. Just a man carrying visible regret in tired eyes. He held his hands awkwardly together as though unsure whether he belonged there at all. Monroe told me about the service, he said quietly. I almost did not come. Alina looked back toward her father's photograph. But you did. Ryan nodded once and slowly approached the pew across from her without sitting down. Rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his jacket from outside. I spoke to my father this week, he admitted after a long silence. First honest conversation we have had in years. Alina listened quietly. He was a cop too, Ryan continued. I used to think being respected meant never looking uncertain, never questioning yourself. His eyes lowered toward the chapel floor. Now I think maybe I confused authority with worth. Candlelight flickered softly across the room, while thunder rolled farther away outside. Alina studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. The hardest part of this job is not learning how to use power. Ryan looked up slowly. It is learning when not to. The words settled gently into the silence between them. No anger remained in her voice now. Just truth. Ryan exhaled shakily and nodded once, absorbing the lesson like someone finally hearing it instead of defending against it. Near the chapel windows, rain slid slowly down the glass beneath the dim city lights. I do not know if I deserve another chance, Ryan admitted quietly. Alina looked toward her father's photograph again, then toward the wet streets glowing outside the hospital. Most people do not earn change before they begin it, she said softly. They choose it first. Ryan's eyes filled slightly, though he quickly looked away. For the first time since the supermarket parking lot, neither rank nor humiliation stood between them anymore. Only humanity. Simple, fragile, difficult humanity. Alina rose slowly from the pew and adjusted the sleeves of her coat. As she passed Ryan near the chapel doors, she paused briefly beside him. My father used to say storms reveal things sunlight hides. Ryan swallowed hard, but said nothing. He did not need to. Outside, the rain had already begun slowing into mist. Alina stepped onto the wet sidewalk beneath the pale glow of hospital lights, while traffic moved quietly through the city around her. Behind the chapel windows, candlelight flickered softly beside her father's photograph. And somewhere reflected in the dark glass beyond the rain, a black woman walked forward through the night, with her dignity still intact.